So now you can see that we have the rear timing cover installed. We have cranked that camshaft, the exhaust camshaft on the passenger side up. A little trick that I do, now mind you, this is a custom wrench. I don't even remember what size it is. I ground it to fit, you know, on the intake. It has to be real thin. So you can even see in there. Yep. But what I do is I put a microfiber on here and I put an adjustable crescent wrench on there, and then I make sure that this is wedged because, you know, if you're using this crescent wrench to hold this cam and the cam was to, you know, relax under spring tension, you know, I don't know, but it possibly could damage that casting right there, maybe crack it. So I just don't even play games with it. So I just shove a microfiber in there and then set the wrench. And then that way you can guarantee when you go to do these sprockets, that, you know, it's not going to snap back on you. So other things to address, obviously, before we do the sprockets and secondary chain is that we want to deal with our gallery gaskets. Okay. I highly suggest that you don't use the number 3 Phillips. You know, I have stainless steel upgraded Allen hardware. I've got a composite gasket from Concept Z. So let's just talk about these things. You know, I've had in-depth conversations with Clark at Jim Wolf. I've talked to a lot of guys about this. So this is my opinion on it. You know, I think that this is engineered obsolescence. And I think that the torque in which these things are put on here is just at it must be the exact amount of torque that if this engine has any kind of detonation or has some sort of harmonic resonance, it begins to back the screws out. And you're like, well, Seth, what evidence do you have? Okay, so I've taken a million of these things apart, right? I've seen these gallery gaskets. I've seen them intact at 120,000 miles. I've seen them beginning to rupture with all screws backed out at like 30,000 miles. Okay, and the example that I use so I have a buddy that's got one of these cars and it was twin turbo, had about 30 or 40,000 miles on it, but this guy meticulously maintains everything. And then I took his engine apart, bone stock engine, to build it. Every fucking screw was completely tight. It was the shot, but I know this guy. He changes his oil. He's got a perfect tune. He's had it retuned multiple times. It doesn't beat on his car. So he had upgraded cooling systems. So it's just something to think about, guys. You know, I think that that's what the premature rupture failure starts from. I think it's like you're shaking the motor, and it's like these things, you know, Clark at Jim Wolf says that he thinks that it's basically like, you know, the torsional twist, expansion and contraction of the case versus the block and all this stuff, you know. And it's like, oh, you know, I completely agree as well, but there's something else. There's another aspect to it. Maybe in the comments if you guys have thought of something. But anyways, long story short, to avoid the problem, upgraded gaskets, 271 Loctite on Allen head stainless steel hardware is the upgrade. You know, other things notably, you're going to go ahead and put your oil pump on. You're going to put your water pump on. You're going to have a guide right there. You've got your primary grenade tensioner. Something else to think about too. Whenever these gallery gaskets like rupture, you know, it's literally the first supply. So oil pump is going to supply oil down through the oil pan, through the tree filter, comes back up through this passage. Check it out. Look at this passage. Comes right up to here. So as soon as this thing ruptures, man, I mean, you're totally screwed. And I think that Nissan knew that from the beginning, that these engines probably sat them on a dyno and they were probably indestructible. And the only thing that they could do is like, we have to have some sort of failure, because I think these things would have literally lasted forever. So some other stuff, let me turn on my light here. Okay, so these are all the parts and components that I'm changing out. This is crazy that I have to note this. Okay, right, left, obviously from when you're sitting in the car, not when you're looking at the engine. I don't even know why I have to go through that. Same part number on the exhaust sprockets, just so you know. Same timing indication. This is a factory Nismo oil pump housing with Boundary Engineering upgraded billet guts. And then, of course, all the new factory timing chain guide components and whatnot. Only tools you'll need is soft base hammer, torque wrench, 17 millimeter half-inch drive, 10 millimeter, and then you'll need a 12 for those dudes over there. I'm gonna go ahead and start putting this thing together, and then I'll make a little clip about how to get the sprockets on, because I think a lot of guys struggle with that, and I got a little technique for it. So let's see what we can get put together here. All right, hopefully this will be a a good enough angle to show what I'm doing here. So you can see that we have our dowels paint penned in a vertical position on the tower. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to install the intake and exhaust sprocket with the secondary chain, and I'm going to kind of show you some techniques. It's a pain in the butt to do, kind of however you do it. So first things first, if you want to know, both of the secondary chains are the same part number. So this is the and also too, the exhaust sprockets are also the same part number, so they're going to be the same. But on this side, you can see I have two circles lined up on the outside. Obviously on bank one, it's my right side indicated intake sprocket, single circle on the back. All right. And so what you want to do is have this thing set up with your half-inch drive extension, 17 millimeter socket. And what you want to do is kind of try and set this thing up on there. Then go ahead and feed a couple threads. Just so that the intake sprocket's not going to actually physically fall off. All right, and then you're going to sit there and kind of move it back and forth and see if you can get the intake sprocket to take. So I know that the intake sprocket is taking. So what that's kind of telling me is that right now when I'm looking at it, I can see that my dowel is over here, my sprocket's over here. So knowing that this exhaust camshaft will relax, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring my intake camshaft over this direction so that it brings the entire assembly over, okay? Just slightly like that. And you kind of have to play with the depth of them kind of back and forth till you get it right. Mine's not lining up on the dowel for some reason. There we go. Come on, buddy. Just fed on there a second ago. Oh, almost had it. Okay. Yeah, there we go. So if you sit there and mess with it long enough, it'll eventually go into place. So mind you want to move your camshafts back around, back and forth. Don't forget that you're going to be utilizing that Jim Wolf Technology long bolt kit. So also too, before I even do that, what you want to do is go ahead and feed this intake sprocket bolt in. My trusty ratchet there. Obviously wibble wobbling it back and forth, making sure that you're up on the dowel pin. Okay, so just get a slight slight amount of tension right there. Rubber hammer. All right, and that's bottomed out. Okay, continue to tighten this guy. But yeah, don't feel bad if it's a pain in the ass to get this Bank 1 sprocket system on. It's still to this day, I just don't have a perfect feel for getting it just right every time. All right, nice and positive. Okay, so something to take into consideration. Look at this this lip right here. Okay, you see that? That's what the copper crush washer is for on the Jim Wolf Technology long bolt kit. Small washer, big washer, crush washer. Before I do that, obviously, need to put a little bit of motor oil on it. I prefer not to Loctite these ever, especially if you have to take this thing back apart. Okay, so this is basically going to be the same thing for the other side. And then 76, 91 foot-pound of torque. All right, we're over here on Bank 2, driver's side. So you can see I've got one single oval on the intake sprocket, and if I flip it around, I have two ovals on the outside of the exhaust sprocket. Let's go ahead and try and get this dude up on there. You know, another thing to think about, you can visualize in your mind too, is that these two upright dowel locations, you know, try and get that clocking in your mind's eye when you're putting these on. Okay, like I said, you want to go ahead and put a few threads on this intake sprocket just so that it won't fall off. Okay. Kind of find that dwell position. So that's that dwell position where then you're gonna use a hammer to tap it on. Just like that. All right. and tighten up your sprocket. Like I said, it's a pain in the ass every single time. Put my long bolt kit in. A little bit of motor oil on the threads. And simultaneously, you'll observe that you're doing this correctly, because you're going to see that your bank 1 intake sprocket is now lined up with your indication there, and the same thing for your bank 2 intake sprocket. And of course, in between the orange links on your secondary is the so we're supposed to mark up on the exhaust, or line up on the exhaust side. But then there's going to be one more trick for the primary chain, but just keep moving along.